The world fell in love with Marilyn Monroe, but the world never met Norma Jean. Before the white dress, before the pink gown, before Happy Birthday, Mr. President. There was a charity ward in Los Angeles, a mother who couldn't stay, and a 2-week-old baby handed to strangers at a doorstep, like she was a problem being transferred between departments. Her father told her to contact his lawyers. Her mother was dragged away by hospital workers while she watched from a hallway. She became ward number 3,463 before she turned 10. 11 foster homes, an orphanage dormitory, sexual abuse that nobody punished and everybody ignored, a marriage at 16 arranged so the paperwork would work out. The most desired woman of the 20th century spent her entire childhood being told she was a burden. This is not the story the studio system sold you. This is the girl underneath it, and she deserved so much better. June 1st, 1926, Los Angeles General Hospital, Charity Ward. A baby girl was born at approximately 9:30 in the morning to a woman who had already lost 2 children and was already losing her mind. The birth certificate listed Martin Edward Mortenson as the father. He was not the father. He and Gladys Baker had separated months before conception and would later insist the marriage was never consummated. The real father, confirmed by DNA evidence in 2022, was Charles Stanley Gifford, Gladys's supervisor at Consolidated Film Industries. He wanted nothing to do with either of them. When Norma Jean tracked down his phone number at 18, his response was 4 sentences long. "I'm married. I have a family. I have nothing to say to you. See my attorney." She tried twice more to meet him. He refused both times. She was a problem he had decided not to have. Gladys Baker was 24 years old, a film negative cutter, already fragile in ways that would eventually become catastrophic. Her first husband had been abusive and had kidnapped their 2 children, fleeing to Kentucky. Her own mother suffered from what would today be diagnosed as bipolar disorder. Her grandfather had died in an asylum. Mental illness ran through her bloodline like a current nobody knew how to shut off, and nobody was warning Norma Jean. 2 weeks after the birth, Gladys brought the infant to the home of Albert and Ida Belender in Hawthorne, California. A religious couple. They took her for $5 a week. Norma Jean would spend her first 7 years calling them Aunt Ida and Uncle Wayne, believing for much of that time they were her actual family. Those years were the most stable of her life. Ida was devoted and present. The Bolenders wanted to adopt her permanently. Gladys refused. She had already lost 2 children to an abusive man. She would not legally surrender a third, even if keeping her meant keeping her just out of reach, passed around at a distance, never quite belonging to anyone. In 1933, Gladys brought Norma Jean home to a small house in Hollywood, a few months of something that almost resembled normal. Then Gladys learned her 13-year-old son Jackie had died of kidney disease. The grief broke something that had already been cracking for years. January 1934. Norma Jean heard a terrible noise on the stairs. She ran into the hallway. Her mother was being dragged away by strangers. She had paranoid schizophrenia and was committed to a state hospital. An 8-year-old girl stood alone in a Hollywood house that suddenly contained no one who belonged to her. She would not have a real home again for 4 years, and even then, it would be borrowed. September 13th, 1935. Grace McKee walked a 9-year-old girl through the doors of the Los Angeles Orphans Home Society at 815 North El Centro Avenue. The staff logged her as ward number 3463. Grace left. Norma Jean did not cry. She had already learned that crying changed nothing. The orphanage was officially described as a model institution. Clean, organized. The staff meant well. Norma Jean slept in a dormitory with 26 other girls and understood with the specific clarity that abandoned children develop early that she had been left again. From the window, she could see the RKO Studios water tower rising over the Hollywood skyline. She stared at it every night. She told herself she was going to be a movie star, not because she believed it yet, because she needed something to believe. Over the following years, Grace cycled her through 11 foster homes. And this is the part that is very difficult to write and very important not to skip. Norma Jean was sexually abused in multiple placements. In one home, a lodger locked the door. She reported it. Her foster mother slapped her across the face and said, "Don't you dare say such things about that nice man." That man faced no consequences. None. And a child learned the first of many devastating lessons about how the world operates, that her pain was less important than the comfort of the adults around her. The stutter began after the first attack. It became so severe she could not finish sentences. She stopped speaking unless she had to. "I guess you could say I gave up talking for a long while," she recalled years later. "I thought I'd die whenever a teacher called on me. I always had the feeling that anything I said would be wrong or stupid." Think about that for a moment. The woman whose voice would one day stop rooms full of people could not speak in a classroom without wanting to disappear. That did not happen by accident. That was the direct result of what was done to her and what happened when she asked for help. She was also tall, skinny, mocked for her clothes, laughed at for telling people she planned to become an actress. The humiliation was total. The system designed to protect her had failed at every level and in every direction. "The families I lived with had one thing in common," she said years later, "a need for $5. I had learned not to bother anyone by talking or crying, in her own words, recorded on tape. "I'm not calling myself an orphan. I was brought up with a waif. I was never used to being happy, so that wasn't something I was counting on." Grace McKee had good intentions. That much deserves acknowledgement. She loved Norma Jean in the erratic, imperfect way that people love children they are not equipped to care for. She was Gladys's best friend, movie obsessed, and she told the girl repeatedly that someday she would become a movie star. It cost her nothing to say it, because Grace's own life was chaos. She married a man named Irwin Goddard, called Doc, and brought Norma Jean into the house. Doc allegedly molested her. The state-appointed guardian brought a child into a home with an abuser, and when it happened, Norma Jean was moved out. Not Doc, Norma Jean. She was the one who left. She was 11 years old and had already learned that when something terrible happened to her, she was the thing that got relocated. What followed was the usual rotation: Grace's house, a relative's house, another foster placement, back again. The addresses accumulated. The adults disappeared. The pattern repeated itself with the reliability of a system that had never been designed with her in mind. Then came Anna Lower. Grace's aunt was 58 years old, a Christian Scientist in Sawtell, with no particular obligation to anyone's broken child. She took Norma Jean in anyway. And she did something that sounds simple and was, in the context of this child's life, almost revolutionary. She was unconditionally, consistently, and quietly kind. Anna did not need Norma Jean to be useful or grateful or perform recovery on anyone's schedule. She encouraged her schoolwork. She attended church with her on Sundays. She let her talk about wanting to be an actress without flinching. For 4 years, Norma Jean lived in one place, enrolled at Emerson Junior High, excelled in English, contributed to the school newspaper, discovered she loved writing. The stutter, carved into her by trauma, began very slowly to loosen. She changed my life, Monroe would say decades later. She was a wonderful human being. Anna Lower was not famous. She left no legacy the world recognizes. She was a 58-year-old woman who gave a damaged child 4 years of consistent love at the precise moment when it was either that or complete collapse. The least famous person in this entire story may have been the most important one. Anna's health declined in 1941. Norma Jean was returned to the Goddards. The 4 years ended, but what had taken root inside them did not. Doc Goddard's company relocated him to West Virginia. California law prevented the family from taking their ward across state lines. That left Norma Jean with 2 options: return to the orphanage or find another exit. Grace found her another exit. The Goddard's neighbor had a son, James Doherty. He was 21 years old and working at Lockheed Aircraft. Grace approached his mother with what she apparently considered a practical solution. If Jim married Norma Jean, she would not need to re-enter the state system. Everyone agreed this was reasonable. Nobody asked the 15-year-old girl what she thought. Let us be clear about what this was: a child who had been abused in multiple homes, who had lost count of the number of beds she had slept in, who was still carrying a stutter caused by trauma she had never received any help for, was being handed to a man 5 years older so that the adults in her life could close an administrative problem. That is what happened. The word they used was marriage. On June 19, 1942, 18 days after her 16th birthday, Norma Jean became Mrs. James Doherty. She dropped out of high school to do so. Jim was not a villain. He was decent and ordinary, and entirely wrong for her. She called him Daddy. That single word revealed more about her childhood than any biography ever could. In April 1944, Jim shipped out with the Merchant Marine. Norma Jean got a job at a munitions factory in Van Nuys. She inspected parachutes and sprayed airplane parts, and she earned $20 a week. It was the first money she had ever earned herself. She was 18 years old and nobody was in charge of her. For the first time in her life, that felt like freedom rather than abandonment. Late 1944. Army photographer David Conover arrived at the factory on assignment. He saw a girl putting propellers on airplanes, her face smudged, her hair curly, and he stopped. He spent 2 weeks teaching her how to pose. He recognized something she had always suspected about herself. By 1946, 33 magazine covers, a screen test, a Fox contract paying $75 a week, a new name built from her mother's maiden name, and a Ziegfeld star she had never met. Norma Jean Mortenson signed with 20th Century Fox on August 24, 1946. Ward number 3463 had become the most photographed woman in the world. She had dreamed the hardest. It worked. But Norma Jean never disappeared. She just learned to stand very still behind Marilyn and let the world look at someone else. There was a dormitory window in Hollywood. 26 other girls in the room. One of them, staring out at an RKO water tower in the dark, making herself a promise nobody else could hear. The world spent decades consuming Marilyn Monroe. Her image, her voice, her body, her mystery, and almost none of them knew they were watching Ward number 3463 perform the hardest role of her life. Not Lorelei Lee, not Sugar Cane, not the woman in the white dress. The role was simply this: a person who is wanted. She rehearsed it in every foster home. She performed it until she had nothing left. Norma Jean came into this world unwanted. Marilyn Monroe left it alone. The distance between those two sentences is the whole story. If this is the kind of history that stops you cold, you belong here. Baron Grimm exists for exactly this. Subscribe. There are 100 more names like hers waiting.